Is so powerful. I think if you as a real estate agent have a neighborhood that you're working as a farm and you're saying there's maybe some change in the principal, or maybe there's some change in the dynamics around a school. Maybe they've gone to a lot of split classes and that's not on vogue right now with the demographic that you work with. You could say, look, hey guys, you live in this neighborhood. I want to get this information out because I think it's important. This is only for people who have children who are of this age. So you could read this, and I wanted to make sure I'm giving you value. And dropping something like that's so much better than saying like Happy Thanksgiving. Don't forget to clean out your gutters. Going over things. When you looked at some of the brands that you worked with Nestle, you worked with Energizer, Toyota, you worked with all of these big brands. We always say the word brand, and that's one of those things that it's used like the word Kleenex, and Kleenex obviously is a brand. And so what is the most fundamental level? What is a brand?
That's a great question. And it really speaks to something that I've observed over the years. There are an awful lot of products with names that are masquerading as brands. Creating a brand doesn't require a big business, doesn't require a big budget. You don't have to be doing big advertising. You create a brand when your customers believe that there's value in the brand that goes beyond the functional and transactional benefits of the product or service you're offering. I call that relationship equity. And if you've brought value that goes beyond functional, beyond transactional to the relationship, that's what creates a brand. And you can do that whether you're a big business or a small business, whether you have tens of thousands of customers or tens of customers. If you're bringing value that goes beyond the functional benefits of what you're doing for them, then you've created a brand.
When we look at that brand on you got a business coach who creates a brand identity that the value transcends that hour that they spend with the person or the different thought process they walk through. That's one element of a brand. When you have a company that has a multi-threaded product offering, such as, I don't know, when you think like Nestle, I mean, they offer so many different things and they're stacking all of these different brands. What is a good strategy around somebody who's stacking brands?
Well, a lot of those brands, even with these big businesses, they're products with names that are masquerading as brands. They really aren't. They become commodities. And, having a big budget doesn't make you a commodity. Now, if you work hard at finding who your best customers are and creating opportunities for those best customers to interact with you, that's where your social media strategy gets involved. That's where your email marketing gets involved, where you've got opportunities to reach out to these customers and tell them about did you know that you can use the product this way? Did you know that people like you are often doing this? Those kinds of that kind of additional information that's being delivered, that's surprising. That is, wow, I didn't know that. That's valuable. That's how any company, multi-tiered company, whatever, if they're focused on that. Now, another key distinction here is recognizing where building the brand is worth the investment. For most businesses, 80% of their revenue is being generated by 20% of their customers. That 20% are not the same as the other 80%. They tend to be heavy category users. They tend to be much better informed about their options, much better informed about how the product works and how it can work for them. They've got a big need for what the product is offering. A common mistake that's made is that the brands talk to all of their customers the same. I remember sitting down with the chief marketing officer at Sprint when we were first won the assignment to help them with loyalty and churn. that they were having in their long distance division. And I sat down with him and I said, you need to stop spending so much money. And that just floored me. And we talked about the 80-20. We talked about the best customers. Right now, you're spending all this money and you're talking to everybody with a pulse. 80% of them don't care. And all the marketing in the world is not going to change that. So you need to find the 20% and then focus your budget on them, because they will both appreciate it and give you the return on the investment you're looking for.
Yeah, when you have that focus on the Pareto principle and focusing on where the 20% makes the maximum impact, I think that applies to whether it's a marketing campaign or, even when you're just speaking in front of an audience. A lot of times what people do is they speak to the audience, or even on their social media, they speak to the followers rather than speaking to that one person who's going to actually make a buying transaction. And that is definitely a flaw of a lot of businesses. They speak to the many rather than speaking to the one.
Exactly. And it's such an important thing, because if you have the insights into these groups, it really can impact how you go about creating your marketing. What kind of words are you using? Those folks think about these products and services in a different way than the average person does. You need to capture the essence of that and incorporate that into your marketing. And then when people see the marketing, they'll go, yeah, that's for me. They're talking my language. They get me.
Yep.
And when that happens, your marketing will break through the noise. And this isn't about making it pretty. It's about making it relevant.
If I said to somebody, I've got a book you should read, and leave it at that, they're like, well, okay, great. If I say I got a book that you can read on a sport, that sounds okay. If I got a book that you can read that's on, jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, okay, now you've got my interest. I've got one on no-gi Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I've got a book that's on no-gi Brazilian jiu-jitsu about leg locks. I've got one that'll help you in 30 days get better at leg locks so you can win your tournament 3 months from now. Now we're getting to something that speaks to me. I'm like, hold on a second. Okay. I'm focusing on learning leg locks right now. And this is something that speaks right to me. This is something I can action on.
Right. And that, David Ogilvy, who's a very famous ad guy, right? And no, I'm not old enough to have worked with him. One of his great lines that I use an awful lot: the essence of strategy is sacrifice. And that is such an important concept for a business owner to recognize. You start trying to talk to all people, you are going to end up talking to nobody.
Yep.
When you're talking to your best customer, your prime prospect, and talking to them in their language, they're going to pay attention. But first of all, it's going to break through the noise. Second of all, they'll lean forward, because it stops being advertising at that point and starts being part of a relationship building process.
I think that's such a poignant thing to say, that when you're speaking to the masses, it's advertising. When you're speaking to that individual, it's the start of a relationship. That is powerful.
And that it is so true, because the nature of, I do a talk about the non-icky marketing funnel. And the key thing, a lot of people, I'll ask them, do you have an avatar? And they go, oh, yes, we have an avatar, or a brand persona or whatever. And then I'll ask them to show it to me. And of course they can't find it because they haven't looked at it in 6 months. And then I'll ask them, have you mapped the buyer's journey? And almost always they're like, not sure even what that is.
Yeah.
And when you can map the buyer's journey and you understand your avatar and how they transact, because this outside-in concept is very powerful. At different stages in the journey, they're going to have different questions and different obstacles that need to be overcome. If you understand those questions and obstacles, then you're going to have marketing that's going to not be transactional. It's going to be value adding.
Yep. That is so critically important. I was at Bold with Keller Williams for the past 6 weeks. It's one of the largest real estate organizations in the world, really. And they just reinvented their whole bold training system. And that was right there was exactly one of the biggest things that they were hitting, is that if you can understand the journey of what your clients are going through, they don't become clients, they become people you're in relationship. And if you know that they just had a child, well, you know that, 3 to 4 years from now, that local school is going to become really important. And if that's not the school they want, they're going to need to make a change. And if you know that, their kids are about to graduate, you know that maybe they need to start thinking about downsizing because they want the kids to stay away once they move away.
And that's a great example of how you can create a brand, because rather than reaching out to this customer and saying, hey, I can sell your house, you can reach out to the customer and say, look, I've just come across this study of educational systems in this area that I think you might find useful. That's speaking to them at where they are in their journey, and that's value that goes beyond the functional and transactional.
It's so powerful. I think if you as a real estate agent have a neighborhood that you're working as a farm and you're saying there's maybe some change in the principal, or maybe there's some change in the dynamics around a school, maybe they've gone to a lot of split classes and that's not on vogue right now with the demographic that you work with, you could say, look, hey guys, you live in this neighborhood. I want to get this information out because I think it's important. This is only for people who have children who are of this age. So you could read this, and I wanted to make sure I'm giving you value. And dropping something like that's so much better than saying like, Happy Thanksgiving. Don't forget to clean out your gutters, like all the stuff that every agent sends. And I think that because it speaks to everybody, right?
And it
right?
also,
when it speaks, yeah.
It also communicates that this is one person talking to another person. People don't buy things.
Well, that's where it goes to the biggest seduction when you start a small business. We'll talk about starting versus buying, but when you start a small business, one of the biggest seductions that people have is they look at the big brands, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis, the, Budweiser brands, and they say, what are those people doing? And we need to do the same. This is something that I think you've got a really strong message about, and I'd love you to explore that a little bit.
Well, and even when you think about the big brands, now, obviously, those big consumer packaged goods brands are not going to be able to get into one-to-one conversations with their audience. But think about those beautiful Coca-Cola ads that talk about the joy of Christmas, that, what they're doing in that advertising is they're bringing value to their consumers' lives. If it's as simple as just making them smile, right? This is value that goes beyond the functional and the transactional, and they're using advertising to deliver it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about it that way, looking at the Coca-Cola brand, where they do the, as you say, the Christmas one, and you look at it and it's some nice Christmas scene with, something that has nothing to do with Coca-Cola. It might have a logo somewhere in the background or whatever, or somebody has a can of pop or something. But otherwise, the 99.9% of it is the emotion that you get out of looking at the scene. And some of them
Budweiser and the Clydesdales.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. Now, when you do look at a small business and you think about, they don't have the budget to win smiles, they don't have the budget to kind of, win at that level. What is a good strategy that they can take on when they're starting to build out their brand?
In the world of digital marketing, a business only owns two assets. They own their list and they own their website. Everything else is rented land, and particularly the email list. And this doesn't have to be, use that vehicle to deliver value. Coach my clients around the 70-20-10 strategy. 70% of the content in the email should be solely focused on value. Things that go beyond the functional, etc. 20% should be curated value. Things you found in the marketplace you think your audience will find interesting. 10% can be sales. Hey, we've got this new product coming on. And that can be as simple as the PS in the email. So you might be like, for example, content marketing. I spent a lot of time writing blog posts. I've been doing this a long ass time. A lot of crap running around in my head. So we deliver blog posts to our audience that you might be interested in this. And we keep track of the links and the links that people click. And we see patterns and we start to tag those people with those patterns, and then we'll emphasize more the things we know they're interested in. None of this is technically difficult to do. And then what we'll also do is, and I'll use podcasting for this, I will share within our weekly email things that, podcasts that I've been on, or podcasts that I've just listened to when we were researching podcasts to be on. This guy's really, really good. And we'll share that. That's the 20% of curated content. And then 10% of it might be sales. But even the sales thing, for example, one of the important, very boring, very dry things that are nonetheless very important, does your website have a privacy policy?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because God bless America, every state is different. And it doesn't matter where you are located. It matters where your visitor is coming from. You have to be in compliance with the privacy rules and privacy laws for where the visitor is coming from. Keeping track of all of that is a nightmare.
Well, for sure it is. I think what we did is we outsourced that. Third party or privacy policies.
So we do the same thing for our clients. We use a company in Chicago called Termageddon, and
Yep. Yeah.
They keep track of all that stuff. We've got a JavaScript in there that constantly updating the privacy policy based on the client's profile that's been placed in the Termageddon system. But, that's both a value message, but it's also a sales message because we charge our clients for this.
Yep. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're hitting a value. I mean, the idea, number one, if you hit 70% value, the person's going to open the next email the next time you get it. So your open rates are going to go up. And that means it's going to be a nice warm email. You're not going to get put into the promotions tab. The second thing is if you have something where it links to something external, where you bring in some intrigue, I think then you're getting them to get used to getting into action when you have something. And yes. I think that sounds like it resonates. And then
so
the last thing,
if great way for a small business to build value with their customers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. I think that's very good. That's very good. Now, when we look at the last element around brand, when you first got into this business, and I'm not going to say a number of years ago, I'll let you say that. But when you first got into this business, you were working for large companies. I think your last company that you're at was Toyota. And then you said, okay, I want to kind of make a change. And most people at that point become the hobbypreneur, like running the side hustle, and then they start the business, and then they kind of start to run through all the problems of starting a business, and then they eventually start to scale, and then they get to the point in which you decided just to say, I want to hall pass all of that. I want the VIP ticket to the front of the line, and you just went out and bought a business instead. Could you kind of share a little bit about the journey as to what, first of all, got you to that idea, and second of all, how did it go?
I was at a point, this is about 15 years ago, that I really wanted to get out of the big agency, big brand rat race, because, while it's on some levels, it's very stimulating and very exciting, so on other levels, it's not a whole lot of fun. And the company was a vendor of mine, and they were a digital production studio. The owner of the company I had a good relationship with him. And he was telling me he was interested in exploring other things that he wanted to do. And I was interested in getting out of the business. And now this group was a digital production studio. It was actually called Red 8 Studios at the time. They had developers in Shanghai, China. They were doing the offshore model and all the rest of that. And so I bought the business and tried to make the offshore thing work. Didn't really work. And when I step back, like I said before, a business only owns two digital assets, their list and their website. I talked about the list before. Websites. Most websites are terrible, and they're not terrible because of design or copy. They might also be terrible for those reasons, but Mostly what I've observed is an absence of strategy. And since my background was marketing strategy, marketing communication strategy, understanding how to find your customers and how to communicate with them effectively, and the website is the hub of a business's online presence. Everything radiates out from the website and the consumers are drawn back into the website. That seemed to be a really logical, realistic business space to move the business into. So we stopped doing all of the digital production, banner ads, email coding, all that stuff. And we focused on websites because I felt that was where there was both a big opportunity for my skill set, but also a big opportunity for the businesses to turn the website, so that it stops being a checkbox, right? I'm a business owner. I need to have a website. I got my nephew to make me a website. See, I have a website. Check the box. That doesn't help because that doesn't create value for your customers and it doesn't create value for your business.
Yeah.
So I shifted the business, stopped using the offshore resources, built a team in North America, shifted the business away from digital production and focused solely on websites. And our unique selling proposition, what makes us unique and why we've had the ongoing relationships with design agencies for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, is we bring value. We take a strategic view on what we're doing. The fact that we can design and build a website, that's table stakes. Lots of people can do that. We do it based on strategy. And we say no to clients often.
A yes turns into 1,000 no's. Every yes is 1,000.
Yeah. And, it's one of those, it's the classic, man, I'd really like to take your money, but that's a bad idea. And here are the 4 reasons why. And I'll tell you, when you start practicing that on a regular basis, the trust levels, and again, that's another example of value being delivered above and beyond the functional and transactional benefits of the relationship. That's how you build a brand. Even if you're a small business, you can still take that approach and you can still build a brand. And the brand may not be readily recognized by the masses, but it's absolutely recognized by your customers.
The people are paying and the people are treating you the best. Yeah, I think it's the nomad capitalist is quoted, go where your money's treated the best. And, put your energy where you're treated the best as a business.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's interesting. When you bought the business, obviously you had the idea that you could start it on your own, and it sounded like you did some massive shifts. Was it worth it buying the business versus starting it on your own?
I think so. I mean, there were already relationships with the agencies. There were already relationships with customers. There was cash flow. There was, some processes. A lot of that had to be reworked, but it didn't have to be reworked from scratch. So it was worth it. I think I would, if I had it to do it again, I'd probably do it differently, but I'd still take the same strategy.
Still take the purchasing of a business. Yeah. I always wonder if the best way to interpret the idea of buying a business is the same thing as buying real estate. When you buy vacant land and you now have to get permits, you now have to dig, you now have to deal with the Ministry of Environment, and now you got to put the foundation, you got all those people coming in, and you finally, a couple of years later, get the building up, and then, now you can finally start putting tenants in, and you might not do it the right time because it's the first time you put that product, those people in for property management, and you go through all of that. You could go that route, or what you could just do is buy the building that has tenants.
Yes.
And just make a really good decision on a really good opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, do you think that that's sort of similar when you look at, starting a business versus buying a business?
Yeah, basically that's the equation that I ran through in my head. This opportunity popped up and I thought about it and I went, well, I could probably just resign my job and start from scratch, but here I've got something that's already in motion. And it's so much easier to change the direction of something that's already in motion than it is to get something going in the first place.
Yeah, inertia is such a hard thing for people to understand. We have mortgage agents. I own a real estate business and a mortgage business and a couple other ones. And we'll have these agents come in and, they want to be autonomous. They don't want to integrate. They want to operate independently because they want to be their own boss. Mm-hmm. And they want to start it from scratch. They want to own every aspect of their business. And they end up, some of them will succeed, but the predominant number will fail because of just that one word that you use, which is inertia.
Yeah. And there are lots of ways to go about this. This is not going to work for everyone, but it worked for me for where I was in the stage of my life. I didn't really want to start something from scratch. And I really like people. I like working with people. And this already had a whole set of clients already in place.
Yep.
And it wasn't that difficult a transition. Now, not all of the clients bought into what I was planning, and that's to be expected. But enough did that, we've been doing this for 15 years. How many small businesses last 15 years?
Absolutely. And what did the size of the business do from when you bought it to where it is today?
It's about the same size. It really hasn't looking for world domination here. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is my semi-retirement. My wife teases me, what part of working from 8 a.m. till 6 o'clock at night is semi-retired? But anyway.
Yeah, but when you love what you do, it's different. As you said, you love being with people, and if being productive with people, that doesn't necessarily feel like work.
Well, exactly. And I've got the track record. I've got the scars. I can bring a lot of value to these small business owners that I'm now working with because they haven't had the opportunity to work with multi-$100-million budgets. They haven't had the opportunity to be in a room with Steve Jobs. They just haven't had those opportunities. I have. And I get to share these insights and experiences with them and put things into context. I work very hard to distill things down to principles because principles are universal. They apply whether you've got 4 employees or 4,000.
Yep. There's a guy, his name's Dave Robart, and he's at Grant Cardone's office, 10X guy. And I always remember it, and it just sits in my brain all the time where he says principles are senior to mechanics. And that's something that it just so much resonates with me, whether I'm teaching jiu-jitsu or, working somebody through a new marketing program or whatever for the mortgage business. There's, having that as a fundamental. And I know one of the ones that you brought up just a little bit earlier on, and I want to kind of now start to really flush this concept out. And it's what you talk about is the hub and spoke strategy,
right,
as a brand centric ecosystem. You describe it in the marketing world, but would you say it itself, is it an overarching strategy that a lot of people miss out on using?
Yes, it is. Because it gets at a key flaw. What often happens with a smaller business owner is they end up standing on the rooftop of their building, shouting at the world at large about how awesome they are. Right? The world at large doesn't care. The world at large has their own problems that they're trying to figure out and their own issues that they're trying to resolve. And, that's what's important to them. So what the hub and spoke strategy does is you think about it. I've got props. These are spokes, right? And this is a hub. By themselves, they're nice. I've got a rim here too. By themselves, they're nice, but they don't have any value. When you connect them together, you've got the wheel, the most profound invention in mankind's history, second only to fire, right? But the thing about the wheel, it's still the hub and the spokes and the rim. The power doesn't come from the parts. The power comes from the connections. And if you apply that to marketing, your website is your hub. It's where value emanates out from the website. Consumers come back into the website. Even if you have a brick and mortar, your consumers are still going to your website. They're going there to find your address, your phone number, your hours, whatever it might be. Then the digital media channels that you're using to communicate, whether that's email marketing that we've talked about, or social media, or advertising, or whatever, PR, podcasts, whatever it might be that you're using to reach your audience. Those are the spokes. And then the content and messaging strategy is the rim that holds it all together, that makes it the wheel. And that's where understanding your avatar and understanding the buyer's journey is what informs and is the foundation pieces for the content and messaging strategy. So you can, again, we're going to get into a principle here, get the right message to the right person at the right time.
Yeah. Timing of the message is something that, and it was actually interesting when right after our pre-discussion a few weeks ago, I started having conversations with my team around the idea of the timing. And because we have such an interesting sales cycle it's probably not that interesting because many businesses probably have the same thing where the transaction can take in a moment. You can have somebody come on and they're like, yeah, I'd love to start a podcast. That's great. And bam, let's go right then and there. And then you have other ones where I've got to bring my business partner, maybe I got to talk to my wife, maybe I got to, talk to the accounting department, see if it's budgeted for, whatever it is. And it could take 6 months for the same one. And somebody might even contemplated an idea of it and they'll go into either of those pools. And so that customer journey is unique. But the idea of having something you can connect with them at each point in their journey with a message that's appropriate to give to them at that point in that journey, that was something that I it clicked off in my head after our last conversation. I was like, yeah, that actually is really something that we need to work on. And that's what we've been having some conversations around that, because I think that having that connection at that time, the right place, is where you can create the best impact with the individual. Because if you do really believe what you're offering is going to be impactful for that person, you want them to do business with you. And so make it as easy as possible for them to make that decision.
I'll give you a different example which highlights this, that often makes this clear. Think about SEO. Everybody talks about keyword research. You got to do keyword research. Got to do keyword research. On and on about keyword research. And keyword research is really important. But as with most things, there are two sides to this coin. You need to do keyword research, but you also need to understand search intent. Because if you're focusing on informational keywords relate to upper mid-funnel, the consideration phase, I'm researching, I'm trying to figure it out, and you're trying to use those informational keywords to drive a transaction, not going to work. If you've got commercial keywords, that's lower mid-funnel prospecting, etc., and you're busily giving them high-level information, that's not going to work. Then you get the transactional keywords, the folks that, I'm trying to buy something, right? So that, and as soon as you think about that and you start to think about your own behavior, this becomes clear. And if you can draw people in through a series of these microtransactions and connect with them, when they sign up for your download, your digital download, whatever it might be, don't instantly try to sell them something because they're not ready for that yet. Similarly, if you're using a Google AdWords campaign, make sure that the keywords you're focusing with Google AdWords are transactional keywords. Search intent is super important. And those are people who are ready to buy. So make it easy for them to do that. Send those transactional keywords to a landing page that's solely focused on a sales proposition.
Mm. Yeah, and that's where, again, it's that understanding the customer's journey and knowing where and when to talk to them. You're not going to give a baby climbing gear to go climb Mount Everest. You're going to give them a diaper. And when they go to climb Mount Everest, hopefully you're not giving them a diaper. And so, you're going to give the right thing at the right time, and it's going to have the right
Yes, exactly. And these are simple ideas when you think about it from a principles point of view. And yet, people get overwhelmed and they tend to overcomplicate stuff. Challenge your expectations, challenge your perceptions. Think about, the two sides to whatever it is you're doing. Don't stand on your rooftop shouting at the world at large. Figure out who is your best customer and how to effectively reach them. And be aware that the power in digital marketing isn't about the things, the shiny things, whatever they might be. It's about the connections facilitating it, making it easy for your customer to connect with you and making it easy for you to connect with your customer. That's how you create value beyond the transactional and functional benefits of your product and service.
There was a problem that we would always run into in working with Fortune 1000 companies that is almost identical to the problem that you see in small businesses, in that when you talk about something like that, the first word that comes up to me in my mind is, number one, is consistency. And then the second word that comes up in my mind is patience. And a VP or a CEO running into quarterly earnings and all the reporting that they have to do, and the small business owner who's saying, I got to be able to pay my mortgage and I've got, monthly obligations of payroll and I've got all of these things. How do you get somebody to look at a strategy and have some runway to the idea of saying that it's going to take a little time for this thing to take off, but when it takes off, man, it's going to be amazing.
Right. That's a big challenge always. And I get it. I have a small business too. It's a constant challenge. A lot of times, again, it comes down to being willing to say no. Like I can't do everything, so I'm not going to try to do everything. I'm going to look at the things that are already working, and I'm going to figure out how can I make them work better. It's the principle here is water the flowers and prune the weeds. One of the things that we often talk to clients about when they come to us and they're doing all these different things, and I said, okay, are you measuring any of it? And that usually gets a big silence. And then we'll talk to them about a simple thing called a UTM code, where you can attach a tracking pixel to the tail end of a URL, and it's wherever you see, you see the question mark, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff. And then you can start to determine. We had a difficult conversation with a client the other day who was spending thousands of dollars every month with this, guy who liked to be in a dark room with a hoodie, who was managing his YouTube channel. And I said, look, I'm sorry, man, but the results aren't there. In all of the traffic you got in the last 3 months, you had between 2 and 4 visitors a week from the YouTube channel compared to hundreds from these other channels. Being in a backlit room and wearing a hoodie does not make you a digital marketing expert.
Because I'm going to take that guy off my list. So I'm just going to, there we go. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. I think, there's a lot of gurus that are out there, and, you can, doom scroll to your heart's content on one of these devices, and probably every fifth or sixth is somebody who's saying, I've got this special sauce. I'm going to be the person who's going to help you get there. And as a marketing agency owner, what did you do to really step out, especially working with a small business? In the larger businesses, you're getting a lot of referral from marketing agencies. You've got a lot of pedigree in working with the larger audiences. But when you're talking to the small businesses, how do you step out of that noise and make yourself known to that audience?
Fantastic. Yeah, let's talk about patience.
Yeah, beautiful. Watering the flowers, pulling the weeds. One of the most important things for anybody to do when they're looking at their marketing campaign. And part of growing a garden is not that you're going to plant that flower and 2 days later it's going to be 6 feet tall. It's going to take some time. So in the way that you're addressing with the larger corporations and when you're addressing with the smaller corporations, the number one strategy you're using is which?
It's, add fuel to what's working. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're using content marketing to reach your audience, and you're using a channel like Pinterest. Pinterest is one of our favorite channels because it's one of the only social media channels that is a search engine and also rewards content for link clicks. Facebook doesn't want you to leave. LinkedIn doesn't want you to leave. Pinterest wants you to click the link. So we will run pins on Pinterest for our clients, and we will track the results. And if we get a lot of traction on a particular theme, particular topic, we'll generate more content around that topic.
Because you can track the click-throughs on it, and you can see the outcomes that come afterwards. You're doing all your proper UTMs, and because you're seeing traction in that, then you take that and start to put that to some of the other channels where you get less visibility.
Exactly. And, this isn't about my opinion or the client's opinion. Frankly, my opinion doesn't mean anything. The client's opinion doesn't mean anything. The only opinion that counts is the opinion of your audience. And your audience will be happy to give you their opinion if you're prepared to listen. So when I talk about water the flowers and prune the weeds, the number one task here is determining which is which.
You've right now blown my mind, because right now I'd never thought of Pinterest as a social media platform. That was just a spot where you go to see, I'm designing a room. How do I make it look cute? And, I've never really thought of it as a good test ground for a marketer to figure out what works and what doesn't work. That's really super interesting.
Yeah. And we're using it a lot, and it's surprising. Now, obviously, the majority of the activity there, but even digital marketing and folks who are involved with, those kinds of product related things, they can get a lot of insights out of Pinterest as to what it is that their customers are looking for, because they'll tell them by virtue of their interaction with the pin. And the fact that it's also, Google loves it, because suddenly you're getting all this traffic to these blog posts, which helps your domain authority.
Yeah, because you have high authority links inbound into your website, and then they're actually probably going to consume once they get there, because they're clicking for a purpose.
Right. And that another thing to look for is on analytics. Recognize that it's not one-dimensional. So traffic is one thing. Traffic is a bit of a vanity metric. How long do they stay on the page? Do they scroll when they get to the page? That's telling you whether the content is of value. So if you're indexing over 100 in terms of the length of time on the page, you've got your, whatever your number is, your average time on page for your website. And then this particular page is indexing at 120 of the average. Then that's telling you that your audience is getting value from this content. Do more of that, and you will attract more of your audience.
Yeah, I've heard it horribly said, which says, feed the racehorses and starve the ponies. And that's exactly what you're looking at doing. And, I think we could definitely carry into a second podcast to break down some of the KPIs that you're looking at. I think we could break down your whole Pinterest strategy. I think that's super interesting. And James, you're just a wealth of knowledge. And I think whether it's a company that's a multinational that would work with your Red 8 interactive organization, or if it's a small business looking to work with the innately.com, that's in with an 8ly.com. I think it's wonderful to have this conversation, which isn't just about CTAs, just isn't about, the idea of funnels or whatever. This is really about the high level strategy that needs to come first. And I think, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
It's been fun conversation, Steve. I've really enjoyed it.
Beautiful. And guys, thank you so much. This is the money. This is the mindset. This is the mentoring podcast. We'll see you on the next one.